Oops. There we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol nהיה bidbaro. Chaim. Chaim, everybody. To life. And so we end off the secular year with life, words of Torah, the words of the Parsha. It's all in a name. The book is, in English, is Exodus, but in Hebrew it's Shemos, names. It's all in a name. When we're born, parents give us a Jewish name. It says that the parents are given prophecy that their name should be their name, specifically for them. What's all in a name that it should be specifically for you, the name that you're given? How do we understand that? And that the whole book is called Shemos, names. The name of this parsha, likewise. But before that, anybody here a runner? Well, we're all runners. The question is, what are we running for, right? We all run. So some people want to run to get somewhere, to run the fastest mile they can, or the fastest 100, meters if possible. What do you make sure to do in order to fulfill your wish? What do? You make sure that the runway is not steep, it's not hilly, it's flat terrain, because you want to run and get there as quickly as you can. Some running in life is in order to get where you need to go from point A to point B and get there quickly. And of course, you don't want to have any, or as little as possible, resistance, which makes sense. Absolutely. But there's another type of running. What kind of running would that be? It's not about getting somewhere. It's about the process that in the run that you want to develop yourself, strengthen yourself. A stronger heart, stronger legs. So if that's the case, what would you do? Is it about getting somewhere and getting there quickly? No. If you're running, the 100 meters in competition, you're running a mile in competition, of course, it's about getting there first, or at least top 3, right? And get a medal. But if it's not about getting to the place, but it's about what you're achieving through getting a healthier heart, well, then you're going to probably want some hills. You want some incline in order that you can develop yourself more in a healthy manner. That kind of makes sense, right? So I guess in life, it's all about what we want to achieve. So we're going to get back to that later on. But let us now go into the Parsha. The Jewish people are in Egypt. The truth is, we've been in Egypt already for a while. The last 2 Torah portions. In Parshas Vayigash, Yaakov went down after Yosef revealed himself. He went down to Egypt. Not only went down to Egypt, but Yehuda went before him and set up a a yeshiva there, a place of study. They lived in Goshen, separate from the rest of the Egyptians, so they could be strong. They could keep the ways of the Jewish people to such a degree that it was the 17 best years of Yaakov's life, the last years, right? So that was the two portions prior to this portion. And then we have the following portions next week. We'll have 7 out of the 10 plagues. Parshas Boy, the Parshas Vayera, followed by Parshas Boy, where we'll have the last 3 plagues and the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people coming out of Egypt. And in next week's Parsha, during the plagues, already the servitude, the slavery of the Jewish people was broken during the 3rd plague. The servitude, the slavery from Rosh Hashanah had stopped. And for 6.5 months later, until the end of the 10th plague, things were easier for the Jewish people. And they were finally redeemed. And even during the first couple of plagues, things were easier for the Jewish people. So what comes out from this is that being in Egypt, as far as the parshas are concerned, the previous 2 were good times for the Jews. The following 2, well, the following starts at least easing up things for the Jewish people. And in Parshas Boy, in 2 weeks' time, things are enormously good. We're freed. We come out. So it's only this Parsha that deals with the harshness of the slavery. The backbreaking work of Avodas Perach. Excuse me just one moment. Sorry. All right. Backbreaking work of Avodas Perach that led to great despair and even hopelessness, including, of course, the baby boys thrown into the Nile River, including horrific things as Pharaoh bathing himself in the blood of Jewish children. Jewish people were crushed. They were broken. And even when Moshe comes in this week's Parsha to say to Parai, let my people go, it seems to backfire. That Pharaoh makes things worse for the Jewish people. They need to find their own resources and make the same output that they made previously. Harsher conditions. So that's what this Parsha emphasizes, the harshness, the difficulties, the pain and the suffering of the Jewish people. And yet, what is the opening of the Parsha? Oops, second. Oh, there we are. All right. So the Elish Mois Bnei Israel, and these are the names of the children of Israel. who entered Egypt with Jacob, each came with his family. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, and Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, and Joseph was already in Egypt. Okay, so on the face of it, this seems a reasonable opening for the parsha. The Jews had arrived in Egypt, right? And it goes on to say that after the last of them had passed on, his slavery began. But as commentators question, why is this being said here? That they came into Egypt? We already know this. 2 weeks ago in Parshas Vayigash, we already had an enumeration of them coming down to Egypt. 66 of them, 70 in total, including Yosef's 2 sons, and Yocheved, who was born coming into Egypt. So we already know this. We already know that these are the names of those who came to Egypt. So why is the verse coming and repeating something that we already know? So we're going to learn from this 3 positive messages. The first one, what Rashi enumerates, it brings out the fact that God loves his people. And therefore, he counts them. He enumerates them. He calls them by name, which is what's happening here, enumerating and giving them and counting them by name. Rashi says, although God counted the 12 tribes by name when they were alive, he counted them again after their passing to let you know how precious we are to him. So, in other words, they all passed on. You might think now, okay, we're going to be suffering. We're going to be punished. No. God is expressing his love, the opposite. Describing that in our suffering, know that there's a profound message of God's love for us. That's the first message. Fine. The next message is that love results in something, in a benefit to the Jewish people. What is that benefit? Well, the enslavement didn't take place until the last of the sons of Yaakov had passed on. The last one to pass on was Levi. He was 137 years old when he passed on, which means that the enslavement only started thereafter, which took away 94 years of the Jewish enslavement in Egypt. 94 years. We know that God said to Abraham that your nation will be in a land not theirs, and that there can be a potential of enslavement up to 400 years. But because of God's love for the Jewish people, it only began 94 years after coming down into Egypt, when Levi passed on. In other words, because of his love, it staved off the suffering for those 94 years. So that's the second thing. That's a result of the love that the suffering that was shortened. And a third reason why the names are listed over here is because each name of the sons of Yaakov not only are showing the love that God has for them and for us, but it's also each one shows about God's redemptive quality. Their name brings out redemption. Brings out redemption. So let's see, the Midrash explains, and we're going to have a sample of 4 of them over here. The Midrash tells us, these are the names of the children of Israel. The names are enumerated here to connote their future redemption. The name Reuven, which means to see, alludes to the passage, I saw the suffering of my nation. The name Shimon, which means to hear, alludes to the passage, and God heard their moans. And the name Levi, which means attachment, alludes to the fact that God had connected with the suffering at the burning bush. This fulfills the passage, I am with them in distress. The name Yehuda, which means to give thanks, alludes to the fact that the Jews gave thanks to God when he redeemed them. So here the Medrash enumerates all 12. We only brought down 4 of them, but the idea is God's love is expressing itself both in lessening the suffering 94 years and also that in the names is redemption itself. Okay? So with this, then we can understand the opening portion that begins with all of this in a time that we're going to have the worst suffering. That a message of love and redemption is still there, hasn't been lost, and we need to recognize that in the time of challenge, time of darkness, the time of slavery, that God's love and redemption is yet forthcoming, that we're reassured with that. That makes sense. Need to know that. Be aware of that. But the question is that that's good as a message that we need to be aware in a time that you're suffering. Know that God's lessening your suffering. Know that God is going to bring you redemption coming through all of this. You're going to get through it. Well, why is the Torah portion named Shemos mean names? The names of these beloved ones, the names of these who are redemption, which it would imply that the whole idea of the Parsha is about love and redemption. When in fact, what is happening on the field, what's being played out? A time of suffering, a time of pain, a time of great despair. So again, there's a nuance over here. To say that in that time, recognize and know, be rest assured that God loves you and you will come out of this fine. That makes sense. But the very name of the Parsha, which is an indication of what the Parsha is about, its name is, the content of the portion. Well, the name is Shemos. Shemos here, we're saying, brings out the idea of God's love and God's redemption. That will be the outcome. Fine. But how is it an indication of what they're actually experiencing in the moment? It seems to be the opposite. That is our question. L'chaim. So, to understand our question, we're going to go now to understand what is the distinction between exile, which in Hebrew is called galus, and the times of redemption, which was in times of the Holy Temple, Beis Hamikdash, right? Zman Habayis, the time of the home of the temple. What is the distinction between them? Now, of course, in a time of galus, we don't live independently. We don't live freely, as opposed to the times of the Holy Temple. But it's not just geographical and political issue here. It's more of a distinction in a spiritual reality. And that is the key. The key is about how we perceive God, how we relate to him, and how we connect to him. The times of Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, Jerusalem, right, had a very palpable sense of connection to God. A very palpable and real sense of connection to God. Concrete, palpable God's presence. As the Talmud says, as they came to see, so did they come to be seen. You entered the temple, you felt God's presence in a very palpable way. There was a sense of awe that brought to a love, a sense of God's presence so clear that you felt just like someone who looks right through you. God sees you. And that wasn't just your experience when you were in the temple, but the whole time period exemplified it. As Rabbi Rashab explains, fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, when the temple stood in Jerusalem, the divine presence was discernible in the world. It was palpable in the temple, and from there it spilled over into the rest of the world. Okay, that's Holy Temple. By contrast, though, the psalmist wrote of the exilic era. We have not seen our signs, says in Tehillim, because the divine presence is no longer discernible in the material world. There are too many concealments. Golus is a familiar reality. You know why? Because we're living it. We're living it. We don't perceive God in a palpable way, in a real sense, feeling his presence and his awesomeness. Maybe from time to time we feel something, but it's not on a constant basis. So therefore, it's rare today that a person's going to have a genuine emotional attachment to Hashem in a very real way. Again, that doesn't mean we don't have from time to time feelings. We do. But in the times of the Holy Temple, Bizman Abayis, it's something what people lived with. It was clear, it was concrete, it was real. As the Rebbe Rashab says further. In the temple era, we had a very different relationship with God than today. At that time, we sensed God verily in our souls. We comprehended him thoroughly, felt his presence palpably, and grasped him intuitively. This primed us for an organic mind-heart relationship with God, and we formed a real love, closeness, and even attachment to him. Now in exile, we can't perceive God. This is the meaning of the phrase, I am asleep in exile. Sleep is observed primarily in the eyes. The phrase we are asleep in exile refers to our eyes being closed. We cannot see God. At best, we have a murky understanding of God. Thus, our relationship with God is rooted in our effort to understand him. We are unable to see him. Now, what's amazing, as you would, the thing would be then, well, if God's not real and palpable in our lives in a consistent manner, then why is he in our lives? Especially after 2,000 years of the Jewish experience, 2,000 years of collectively not seeing, and yet we're still connected? How? Why? How's that possible? Moreover, in that time period, we've suffered terrible tragedies. We've been persecuted for our faith. We've been hounded for our religion. We've been battered. We've been taxed, exiled, and murdered. Even though today we live in prosperity and freedom, we're free. that we can observe our faith, our religion, but that freedom brings other challenges, that we don't see God's presence. And hence, we have so much assimilation. So much assimilation, yet the miracle is we're still here. And we still, for most Jews, care to be Jewish. How do we understand that? There's a beautiful idea from Rabbi Manis Friedman. He says as follows: 3,326 years ago, God asked us if we would marry him. We had an extraordinary wedding ceremony and great special effects, and we were wowed. Right? That's a Matan Torah, giving the Torah. After the wedding, he said, I have a few things I'd like to take care of, that I'd like you to take care of for me. So please, I'll be right back. He hasn't been heard from since. For more than 3,300 years, he has sent messengers, messages, postcards, writing on the walls, but we haven't heard a word from him in all this time. Imagine a couple gets married and the man says to his new wife, would you make something, would you make me something to eat, please? I'll be right back. She begins preparing, and the guy comes back 3,300 years later, walks into the house, up to the table, straight to his favorite chair, sits down and tastes the soup that is on the table. The soup is cold. What will his reaction be? If he's a wise man, he won't complain. Rather, he'll think it's a miracle that the house is still there, that this table and favorite chair is still there. He'll be delighted to see a bowl of soup at his place. The soup is cold? Well, yes, over 3,300 years, soup can get cold. So, yes, our relationship with God today is not so warm, not so fuzzy, not with this great passion and heat. It's kind of cool and can be even apathetic at times, right? As opposed to in the time of the Holy Temple, there was great passion, great enthusiasm. But we understand there's a big difference. But the shocking thing is that we're still here. We still call ourselves a Jew. We still are interested in being Jewish and doing Jewish things, doing the mitzvahs. Yes, the bowl of soup is on the table. The mitzvah is being done for thousands of years. How do we manage? More importantly, why? Why is this being done? And this is unique to the Jewish experience. We're a small minority amongst many others, and still today, 2,000 years later, we're still here wanting to be Jewish and to connect. There is no other people like that have this experience, and that after so much time of not having that palpable experience for 2,000 years since the Holy Temple has been destroyed, and still we're here. We want to be Jewish. We still do, but it's kind of a little cold. It doesn't have the same warmth as in the past. So the answer to this question is that our bond to God is our very identity. It's our intrinsic truth. In other words, we're not investing in something outside of us. We're not doing this, so, okay, I'm going to get something more out of doing it. It's never been the Jewish experience. In other faiths, you're going to go to heaven, so you got to invest in it in order that you can go to heaven. But that's never been the Jewish way. Why? because our bond with God is our very identity. It's our intrinsic truth. It's who we are. So we can't stop being Jewish any more than we can't stop being ourselves. Giving up on being Jewish is like giving up on who you are. So committing ourselves to being Jewish, committing ourselves to doing a mitzvah, God's mitzvah, we don't understand its true value. We don't really feel it in its full sense as compared to the times of the Holy Temple. But yet, we've got no choice. It's who we are. It's rooted in our very deepest selves. As Rabbi Friedman continues, ask a Jew sitting in a synagogue on Yom Kippur fasting, do you believe in God? Cannot get a straight answer. It depends on what you mean by God. That's if they're the philosophical type. Otherwise, they simply say, what am I, Rabbi? I don't know. So you ask what appears to be a logical question, then why are you here? For some reason, this average Jew who doesn't believe in God and is not very religious will look at you like you're crazy and say, what do you mean? It's Yom Kippur. This is not normal. Let's analyze this for a moment. If he believes in God and he says no, or when I was younger, I used to, or when I get older, I'll start to. So you don't believe in God? No, I don't. Are you religious? Furthest thing from it. So why are you here? Because it's Yom Kippur. What he's saying is this: I am here because God wants a Jew to be in synagogue on Yom Kippur. So where else should I be? So you say, but you don't believe in God. He says, so what? He doesn't understand your problem. He is saying today is Yom Kippur, even if I don't have a calendar. This is a synagogue, even if I don't like it. I am a Jew, even if I'm not religious. And God is God, even if I don't believe in him. So what's your problem? The same thing happens on Passover. Every Jew sits by a Seder. Ask the average Jew at the Seder, do you believe in God? Leave me alone. Are you religious? He chokes on the matzah laughing. So you're celebrating the Exodus from Egypt 3,300 years ago? History is not my subject. Then why are you here? Where should I be? It's Passover. That's what's so magnificent about the Jew. So what does this show? Even when we say we don't believe, right? What does it mean we don't believe? It means God's not revealing himself like in the Holy Temple. So therefore, I'm not experiencing something with a presence of God. So I don't know him. I don't feel for him. I don't have this conscious awareness of him. But yet, I'm here for him. We discover something deeper in us that we wouldn't have discovered otherwise. In other words, in the times of the Holy Temple, why were you there? Why were you celebrating Yom Kippur? Why were you celebrating Passover? Of course, God's present, God's real. I perceive him. I understand his ways. I feel for him. And therefore that brings me to him. But what's that saying? That's saying that it's my mind and heart that sense and therefore they're attuned, and that brings my commitment. What the time of Golus, of exile, is telling us, that we don't feel that. We don't sense that to such a degree where we can even deny, verbally at least, God's presence and realness in my life. And yet, I'm doing the mitzvah. Why? Because I have an intrinsic connection with God. I'm a part of God. God's a part of me. And I can't separate myself from that. It might not even be the words that are being said, but that's what is underlying the sentiment. This is this truth only emerges in a time of Golus. As the previous Rebbe writes, it is obvious that the Jewish soul is fortified during exile to withstand the fierce opposition it encounters. This is because our intrinsic relationship with God is more evident today than it was in the time of the Temple era. Though our minds and hearts have a reduced capacity to perceive and feel God due to our sins, our hearts remain alert to God, our inner hearts, not our feeling heart, but the core of our heart. It is easier to sense our intrinsic oneness with God today than it was in the Temple era. Today, every Jew can easily arouse their inherent love for God that transcends all logic without much effort. Ironically, the darkness of the exile is the very reason for the emergence of the intrinsic oneness. When our intellectual relationship with God fades, it stops covering up our essence. The darkness of exile allows our inherent connection to God to emerge and expand in the deepest chambers of our hearts. This translates into unshakable faith in God and a commitment to avoid sin and embrace God through his commandments. Wow. In other words, when you understand and you feel, and that's what prompts you to do, to be in a relationship and to connect with God, it's wonderful. But then what happens is it doesn't allow the intrinsic connection that you have with God to be revealed. It doesn't allow that. But when that isn't there, not the awareness, to such a degree that you might even, say, I'm a non-believer. And not the awareness, not the feeling, but yet I'm there to do it, to do the mitzvah. Where does that come from? Not from passion, not from an appreciation. It's the cold soup that's there. It's the enduring bowl of soup that has lasted all of these years. In other words, it's an expression of the core being of me as a Jew that's coming out. I'm committed, I'm a Jew. Where else should I be on Yom Kippur? It's Passover. What else? I should be somewhere else. It's Passover. This is where I need to be. The truth is, if we had an appreciation and for our and a feeling towards God, then we wouldn't be able to reach there. Therefore, what does God do? He removes himself. He makes himself inaccessible to such a degree that a person can even deny him and yet do something for him. Everything that would be a motivator in the human condition, God takes away to bring out the divine condition of the Jewish soul. So it's, when you feel the pressure, and the Jews have felt it for the last 2,000 years in exile. So it's easy to throw in the towel and just give up. Just forget about the Jewish way. We tried it. It didn't work. But the Jews don't throw in the towel. Generation after generation, Jews are still devoted and still showing up. Half believing, partially believing, more believing or less believing. They show up. They identify. They do the mitzvah. They connect. If we didn't feel that pressure, it wouldn't bring out the depths of our soul and the fiber of every being that we are a Jew. Right? So what is happening is the resistance that we face in Golus for 2,000 years, the challenges that we face are the path to make us grow stronger and to find something deeper within us, a faith that we discover our truer self. And this is true of any kind of resistance, as we can understand that. Resistant training is based on the principle that the muscles of the body will work to overcome resistance force when they are required to do so. When you do resistance training repeatedly and constantly, your muscles become stronger, right? So that means the same idea applies to faith. Because of the resistance that we need to overcome, when we encounter it, we grow stronger as a result. So what comes out, ironically, the further we are from God, the less that we feel and sense him, we discover, or perhaps we forge in ourselves, really, the deepest and closest relationship with God. As we say, as it says in Deuteronomy, in Dvarim, that you will seek God, your God, from there, and you will find him because you will seek him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. Meaning from there, where's there? From a distance. From a distance where you can't feel him, where you don't sense him, where rationality and logic doesn't lead you to him, but still you're seeking to be connected, to be Jewish. Where does it come from? The core essence of our being. So distance doesn't keep us far from God. On the contrary, distance resistance makes us grow, the heart grow fonder. There was a family that went through great difficulties. And so they went to a rabbi to get some guidance. So he told them, you know what? I hear the pain and suffering you're going through. I know what to tell you, but for the next several days, please do go to the following. Go over the edge of town to the big hilltop over there. You go to the base of the hill, and for 10 minutes every day, I want you to push your hardest against that hill. So he tells them, okay, sounds like a very unusual request. But the rabbi asks, so the family goes. They come back after a few days. The rabbi says, Rabbi, we did what you requested, but we didn't move anything. We didn't move that hill. It's still there. He says, I didn't ask you to move the hill. All I asked you is to put your full exertion for 10 minutes against the hill. But let me ask you, did your muscles grow in the last few days as a result? Yes. In other words, the resistance that you experience doesn't mean you move mountains, but what it does do is make you grow. Right? It does make you grow. For this, now we can understand Golus, exile from the inside. Right? In other words, there's always external and internal, the outside and the inside. So from the outside, Golus is God's distant. I don't hear and see God over 2,000 years. over 3,300 years that we heard from him. So it's restrictive, which means spiritually and even physically, it's challenging. But on the inside, Golus brings out an innate connection that we have with God that we wouldn't realize otherwise. We flex a muscle that we never knew we had that muscle. So Golus doesn't restrict us, it actually liberates us to liberate our true selves. What we need to do is put on different glasses, not just to see what's on the external, but to see what's really deep down inside what's happening. And that was the purpose of the Jewish Golus in exile. God brought you out of the iron crucible, Egypt, to be a people of his possession as of this day. So on the surface, it seems that God abandoned the Jewish people in Egypt. But on the inside, Egypt is a crucible that forges a strong individual that we become God's people intrinsically. So from that, it's not coincidental that going out of Egypt, we go to Mount Sinai to become his people, right? That's what God told Moses at the burning bush. Take them out of Egypt, you'll come to the mountain, and you will become my people. When you bring the nation out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. As God tells Moses. So Egypt was a crucible that on the outside is extremely painful, very challenging, and very difficult. And therefore, we cry out to God. We call out to him. Right? But as much we can cry out to him in our prayers and meditations and so on, that's not enough. We need the very difficult friction of the crucible, the obstacles, the forces that are pushing back on us in order that we can experience what we need in Egypt, in order that we can be a true receptacle and recipient of God's infinite wisdom and his infinite ways of Torah and mitzvahs, which is extremely powerful. So this idea, right, that we have a paradox over here, right? We have on the external, it is a disconnect. Some on the external, right? It is, we're distant. It's a painful experience going in Egypt, right? But yet on the inside, it's liberation. Comes out in the name Shemos. The story of enslavement begins with the theme of liberation. The best example we have is in the concept of what a name is. So we explained names earlier, that God calls us and counts us and calls us by our name, showing love. But here's even a deeper, profound idea than what a name is. A name is only on the outside for other people, that they can distinguish one person from another, right? On our own, we don't need a name. Moreover, a name tells you really nothing about a person, because 10 people in the room can have the name Mendel, and they can be 10 different personalities from one extreme to the other. So names don't even tell you anything about the person, right? On the other hand, a name is the best handle you have in order to draw attention to the entirety of the person, right? When you call them by name, well, yes, when you're called, you move in direction, you give your focus to the other. And this is what the Rebbe explains in this week's Sicha and Lakuti Sichas, the following. Our names are linked to our essence. They transcend all of the surface dimensions. That's the internal aspect of a name, right? External is just, it's got nothing to do with you. Someone's calling you by name to distinguish you from another person, right? For yourself, you don't need it. So the proof is that when we summon someone by name, they turn to us in their entirety. Moreover, when someone faints, God forbid, their life force is in a state of concealment, suspension from the body. Yet one way to revive them is by calling their name. This demonstrates that the name touches and is bound to the deepest source of life. This is why I can summon our life. This is why it can summon our life force back into our bodies by calling the person by their name. This demonstrates that our essence emerges in our own name from which we appear to be absent. This is like our earlier discussion about the relationship with God during exile. Our intrinsic connection with God only emerges in exile when God is hidden and concealed. So when you call someone by name, you turn and you focus yourself to that person, right? Though on the surface, a name is only external to you. It's only to distinguish, instead of saying, hey, Rabbi, many people turn around, they call by your name. But on innermost, it's touching a deeper place. It's the handle that summons you when you're called, all of you, including your deepest self. Moreover, when a person is faint, we awaken them by calling them by name because it touches the deepest point, a deeper place than the awareness and consciousness of an individual. Faint, they're not conscious. So what we have over here is a name captures two extreme qualities, elements. On the one hand, on the surface, it tells us nothing about the person, nothing about them. On the other hand, it reaches to the deepest layers and touches our deepest selves. What better way to capture the inner meaning of Golus, right? In a name. Just as a name rises from the outside to awaken someone deep on the inside, so Golus creates a resistance on the outside to awaken the depth of the soul on the inside, which would never be awakened otherwise. So the inner meaning of Golus is redemption. The inner purpose of restriction is growth. The inner meaning of confinement is spiritual liberation. So what we have here in calling it Shemos and speaking about the most difficult times of exile is telling us that in that name that is only externally seems to be telling me nothing about the experience, and telling me nothing. God's hidden. The person's hidden in their name. Tells me nothing about the person. But yet, in that experience of Golus is really redemption. So it's amazing over here. What's happening over here? Before I ask you about running, right? So if running is only about getting to the end where you want to go, then everything in between is only a means to that end. And all that counts is the goal line. That's the only thing that counts. And the quicker you can get there, the better. So therefore, you want a life that's you go on easy street. A life that's going to be easy. The journey in life to be simple, because it's about where you want to get to. But that's only a means to an end. And that means everything in between has only got a significance for the goal line. That's not the point. The point is in the journey itself. You have obstacles. Not that you're looking for the obstacles. Don't worry, God will give you the obstacles. And the obstacle of Gullus is a very deep one, profound one. So much so is a question, why are we still here? The soup's cold. Why are we still here? Because we recognize that in Gullus is the most profound opportunity that we have. That I can reveal the true core essence of who I am because of the obstacle that I have to run uphill. It brings out an endurance in me that I would never be able to find otherwise. And what is that? Not that I understand, not that I feel, but I am a Jew. And I am connected to the Jewish people. I am connected to God Almighty. And therefore, I want to express that by doing something Jewish. That is the most profound, beautiful thing. And that's exactly where we are right now. From October the 7th, this is really crushing experience of exile. That probably October 7th in one day is the most heinous day in the life of the Jewish people, perhaps since we've become a Jewish people. Are there more people that were killed in a day? Maybe. Yeah, for sure. In the Holocaust, there were. Absolutely. But not in such a devastating manner. Not in a devastating manner where we, on that day, you could say that Gullus, exile, darkness, was greater than any other day in the history because of social media and because they posted on social media. So we saw the heinous crimes that were never perpetrated in such a manner, never in such a manner. But even if they were, who saw it? Who experienced the darkness of it? What, a prophet knows of it? And therefore he details it to us, but we didn't see it. But on that day, such a darkness, no love of God is being experienced then, in that moment. And what would be the natural, okay, you want to fight your enemy, that's true. You want to defeat them, destroy them, absolutely. We understand that. But that we want to express ourselves as Jews with mitzvahs, as the soldiers are putting on tzitzis, putting on tefillin, singing and dancing with songs of faith in God, in the belief in Mashiach's coming, never before experienced. Some people think that the soldiers are even crazy in what they're doing. But the harshness of it is bringing out the depth of the Jewish soul in a way that never before. And not just these soldiers, but Jews throughout the world. So I've mentioned many times this, but it just keeps on replaying itself. It's so current. Students on campus, we're on campus, there's so much anti-Semitism compared to anywhere else. And yet Jews want to identify as Jews more than ever before. So on campuses, Jewish students are asking for mezuzahs, which is pointing out that they're Jewish. They could be a target of anti-Semitism. Is it logical? It's not coming out of a love of God? Not because they're not coming out of a love of God, not coming, oh, I appreciate Jewish life so much. No, it's like, I'm a Jew. I got to express myself that way. How many people that only came to that recognition now of how their Jewishness is really them? Before they didn't give two hoots about it. As I think Jerry Seinfeld says, I'm a Jew of no consequence. And now Jerry Seinfeld is going to Israel. I hope he's putting on tefillin. I hope he's smart enough to do that. To express it in a mitzvah. All of a sudden, Jews of no consequence are Jews of great consequence. That they recognize that, oh my gosh, I'm a Jew and I want to connect deeply. So much so that our campaign of adopt a hostage, do a mitzvah is like, wow, so many people seeking and just open like never before. Again, it's not coming out of a love. It's not coming of an appreciation. It's coming from a deep sense of identity that this is who and what I am. But of course, so the muscle is flexing. The soul is on fire. And that soul continue to be on fire. And that'll bring ultimately to the redemption. And it should be done with great joy. And that's what's happening, with great joy. Recognizing that I'm nothing greater to be proud of as the fact of who and what I am and who I'm a part of, the entirety of the Jewish people. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
So, as the Rebbe wished Rabbi Nissim Mendel on December 31st, he wished him once, or maybe more than once, I think it happened more than once. He said, a Happy New Year. So he's kind of, Rebbe, Happy New Year. But we had our New Year. So the Rebbe said that the King David says in Psalms, Hashem, that Hashem reckons with the counting of the nations of the world. So there's a calendar, so God reckons with it. And therefore, halachically, you could write a check and say December 31st, right? Because it's part of, Happy New Year to everybody. And most importantly, do another mitzvah. And not only do another mitzvah, but help others to do another mitzvah. As we learned previously, that by being the inspiration for another is even greater than the mitzvah that we do. All right. God bless you. Thank you.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. Be well. Bye-bye.